Good evening, everyone. I'm Dartricia Rollins, the Assistant Director of Karis Circle, the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books and More, the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore, and we're so glad to welcome you in our virtual space tonight. Tonight's event is co-hosted by the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. Some quick housekeeping. If you've not already purchased the book, you may do so via the teal button at the bottom middle of the screen. And if you have a question for the panel, please put them in the Ask a Question box at the bottom center of your screen. If you see a question that you like that someone else has asked, you can upvote it to make sure it gets seen. Tonight, we're celebrating Kay Ibura in conversation with Varian Johnson for a celebration of When the World Turned Upside Down, a heartwarming story of friendship and overcoming adversity in a time of COVID. When the world turns upside down is about community, giving back, and understanding the world around us through the power of generosity. Kay Ibura was born as the middle child in a family of seven, five kids plus parents, in New Orleans, Louisiana. When they weren't disagreeing about everything, Kay and her siblings played competitive rounds of jacks and a card game called Crazy Eights. They also built insane obstacle courses throughout the house involving stacked chairs, sheets, and timers. Her parents were independent thinkers who filled the home with music, culture, and strong principles. Today, she lives in Brooklyn, where she makes art, writes, and does puzzles while her daughter cheers her on. Varian Johnson is the author of several novels for children and young adults, including The Parker Inheritance, which won both Coretta Scott King Author Honor and Boston Globe Horn Book Honor Awards. The Great Green Heist, an ALA Notable Children's Book, a Kirkus Reviews Best Book, and a Texas Library Association Lone Star List selection, and the graphic novel Twins, co-created with Shannon Wright, an NPR Best Book. He lives with his family near Austin, Texas. Please welcome Kay Ibura and Varian Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction.
Kay, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I wish we were doing this in person.
But, yeah, this is kind of exciting though, even though we're not excited.
It is. So I told you before we started, I love the book. And what I would love to do before we get into kind of some questions and conversation is, would you mind giving like a quick 2-minute summary of how you see the book, how you see your novel?
Yeah. So I see the novel as a story of four friends. They're dealing with, those growing pains, issues that you have, identity, friendship, belonging, all that stuff. And then COVID happens and they are forced to reevaluate their bonds. They're forced to deal with issues that their families are having, from mental health to financial issues, exhaustion, depression, and they have to sort of kind of recalibrate themselves. And just like what we experienced in 2020, where when George Floyd was murdered, sort of all the conversation shifted. The same thing happens with the kids when George Floyd is murdered. They have new questions to ask. They kind of have to look at who they are, in as people, but also in their community and how they want to use their voices and participate in this conversation that everybody's embroiled in.
This is a very ambitious novel, which comes together beautifully and about lots of different things. And I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the internal conflict versus these big external conflicts too. But just kind of get the elephant out of the room, the book kind of all starts with COVID. We've got the four friends, the quartet, Shayla, I, Ben, and Liam. They're at school and then things shut down. And I think it's really interesting that at first they don't even use that word COVID. But I'm curious, when did you get the inspiration for the book? How much, obviously the real world affected the book, but how did those things kind of become in tandem?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a fever dream. I've been working on a project for a long time and I was kind of frustrated. It was stalled. We were stuck at home. And I had a conversation with an editor and somehow we kind of hyped each other up. Like, yeah, let's do this. We can write a book about COVID right now. It was like April, like, you know what I mean? Like, what did we know, So I pitched it, and I have a timeline in the back of the book because it just blew my mind how it all happened. I don't remember when I pitched it, but literally I had already written the synopsis, the sample pages, the pitch when it was with Scholastic when George Floyd was murdered. So like I had already kind of envisioned this book without the social justice piece. Mm-hmm. And just a few days in, I was like, oh my God, like there's no way I can write this book without including this. So it's kind of like life just dragged me along. And then when I got to the end of it, I was like, wait, what are you doing? You're writing about now? Like what are you doing? You know? So I think it was like COVID influence in some kind of way, you know, where I was destabilized and I was like, yeah, this is a great idea. You know?
So none of the story has started. It wasn't like you had another manuscript that then changed when COVID started. This was just a brand new thing.
Totally new from beginning to end.
Wow. Did you find that the book changed a lot as we learned? Obviously, it changed when George Floyd was killed, and then we had all of this social unrest, rightfully so. But as we learned more about COVID, did you find things changing during either the initial drafting or the revision process?
No, because I kind of wanted to make it a snapshot of that first year. Yeah. And like you said, like we didn't really call it COVID at the beginning. There was just this sort of unknown, this sort of nebulous unknown where people were kind of suspended and they didn't know, you know, what was happening. So I was really trying to be a snapshot of 2020, you know, of that rude sort of interruption. And then that sort of, I guess, like you just suspended, you know, in nothingness and trying to figure everything out.
Yeah. I love how the characters are all dealing with it differently, but there is this sense of a dread of this unknown that's kind of looming over them. And it really does shake. I mean, I think about how much it shook my world. You know, COVID immediately changed everything in my dynamic. And it was really interesting seeing it through these kids' eyes. I think let's talk about it now. I think handling tough topics is hard. And I think often as parents, we want to shield our kids and shield young readers from the truth, where maybe that's not the best thing, and we need to explore things and kind of confront their fear. So looking at the COVID aspect first, how did you balance that fear and worry, and how did you work to manifest it in all of these different characters?
Yeah, I think that was one of my motivating factors for writing the book is like, you know, you want to shelter your kids, as you said, but COVID was an area where there was only so much we could shelter because we were home, you know, the news was there, kids, their lives were shaken up. It wasn't like, oh, this whole time I didn't know mom and dad was going through this. Like it was right there. And there were kids whose parents were, you know, locked in a room, depressed. And there were parents who were, you know, always gone, and the kids were worried they were going to get COVID. And there were parents who couldn't be around their kids because they were essential workers. Like there were all these issues that kids couldn't be sheltered from. And that was like my motivating question. Like, so what is it? I know what we went through as an adults. And then I know that kids were right there the whole time. So what was that like for them? You know, and that's what I really wanted to dig into. And I tried to reflect the range of experiences that people went through with all the different families. That was my goal, was just to have all these different scenarios so that any kid could read it and be like, oh, I went through this. And maybe a kid and a parent could have a more in-depth conversation where a parent may have just been surviving and they could take a moment and say to their kid, well, what was this like for you? And there could be more conversation and more sort of reflection to kind of handle what they may have been through.
Yeah. And I think you did such a great job with that, with showing these different kids in different family situations and how, you know, each parent has a different job, or they're dealing with COVID and the shutdown in different ways. And then they have different responses to it. Did you find yourself gravitating towards one story in particular or one character in particular? Or were you do you love all of your metaphorical children the same?
I love them all differently. Like Liam just has my heart. He's just so sweet, you know, and a quiet sort of leader in a way. Like he's the one that's sort of the most vulnerable because he's dealing with chronic anxiety. But at the same time, like when they're all being foolish. He just kind of cuts through and is like, come on, guys. You know what I mean? So, and then he's responsible at home. Like he's almost co-parenting with his mother, you know? I is just like a spitfire, like, you know, she's been here before. She doesn't care. She's just her own person. And I find that I admire her the most. Like, it's like, oh my God. You know, Shayla, I feel like I know her, you know, intimately. She's not me, but I think her life situation is a little bit more similar to mine. And actually, Ben was the one that I struggled with. Like all of the characters, when I sat down to write the outline, they just came out. Their names came out, their personalities came out. And I was just kind of like, I wasn't that close to Ben. And I really wasn't doing him a great service in the first draft. And I knew I wasn't, but I couldn't relate to him so much with his like structure and rigidity. And somewhere in the second draft, I realized that he was resisting change. Like he loved his life and he was just anxious and upset because he didn't want his friends to change. He didn't want his family to change. And when I figured that out, I was able to kind of like relate to him a bit better. So it was definitely a journey. They took me, you know, and I was like, okay, let's do this, you know.
I'm trying to think. I think I love them all as well too, and for those specific reasons. I really did find Ben's situation interesting though with his parents. Unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure it's Ben's parents who are having conflict, right? And it's the type of thing where there's conflict before, but then being enclosed in this tiny space really just exacerbates that. He's like stuck with it, like he can't escape from it, and that's got to be really, really tough in a bad situation that turns worse. And I think that was a big thing, at least here in New York. I don't know what you heard in Texas, but that was a huge thing the mayor was dealing with. Like for some kids, school is a safe place. And then it's not safe because of COVID, but you know, your home situation's not great, or you don't have food, or school provides certain things and certain supports, you know? And so Ben's a character that, you know, it was really traumatic for him to be stuck at home with his family. You know, they were going through quite a bit. And actually, I warned you I was going to mention your book. It reminds me of like just how your character was sheltered. And as the book went on, he learned more and more about his father, and to the point that it was a very sort of rude awakening where he couldn't be sheltered anymore from the truth, you know? And I think for kids in COVID, there was a lot of times where you just couldn't be sheltered, you know? That's a really tricky thing to think about too. You know, you want to protect your child, but at some point, if you protect them forever, they are naive and they are ignorant of the world and they are not prepared for it. Whereas you push them out too soon, they don't have the emotional maturity to understand what's happening. Whereas I think you handle that really, really well. First with COVID, and also with starting with George Floyd in the book. Can you talk a little bit about how you worked, how you balance talking about something that's so important in a way that is respectful for a young reader's age?
That was, I think, probably the most challenging part for me. The chapter, I think, A Horrible History, where Shayla's dad really kind of sits them down and talks to them. That first time I wrote it, it was just like a speech, you know. My editor was like, you know, maybe, you know. And I had to sort of reframe it and really get back into the story. But I felt a lot of stress and a lot of pressure to accurately represent the history to the extent that I could within the context of the book. And as I think I filtered in sort of the conversations and how the kids would relate to it, it made it easier for me to make choices and sort of not just try to throw everything in there. And one of the things I appreciate, again, about Ben is that later, after when they're going around the building, kind of, you know, talking to people, he realizes the difference between him and Shayla. You know, in the first chapter, where in The Horrible History, when Shayla's dad is talking to the kids, Shayla is feeling embarrassed, you know, because she knows it's different. She's having a different experience than her friends. But later, Ben actually realizes it, and his competition, his little competitive edge, is like, wait a minute, you know, this girl knows more about this than me, and why, you know? And I think being able to kind of show where the different kids stood in relationship to this helped me, I think, look at how, as a community, we could look at social justice and racism differently, and how we could all sort of contribute, you know, our own lens to the conversation.
I think, you know, I'm getting on my soapbox here a little bit, but I I don't like stories that are all about the white gaze or how, white people can learn from people of colors, their struggle and everything. And I really appreciated how you approach this in the story. I personally love the conversation between Shayla and her father, and kind of Shayla's. I'm glad that we didn't lose her perspective while adding these other perspectives in as well too. It was a really nuanced thing to do. For me, when she walks in, her dad says they killed another black man again, or something along those lines. That really hit, and she knows immediately he's talking about the police. Like, there's a conversation that happens, or a nuance, an understanding in that family that will be different than other families. That I think you captured so well.
Right, as well as the impact, the emotional impact of it on her father. And that was also something that is important to share, because I think from the outside, some people just think of it as a social justice issue, something objective. What's your position? Whereas, in many Black homes, it's a mental health issue.
Yep.
It's a identity issue. It's a issue of belonging and citizenship. There's so many layers to what it means and what the impact is. And so it was important to be able to show that it's bigger than just, who's right and who's wrong.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Was that the hardest scene? That scene where her dad is sitting everyone down? Was that the hardest scene in the entire book to write, you think?
I think so. For me, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm also, I'm the middle child of 5. I have thrived on invisibility all my life. Like, I've been like, they say the middle child wants attention. I'm just learning to like attention at this age, as an old woman. But as a child, I'm like, nobody knows what I'm doing. Swerve, swerve, swerve. You know what I mean? I like that. So, I grew up with activist parents. I was going to demonstrations as a child. We were coloring, protest signs and stuffing envelopes with, flyers telling you about police brutality and, imperialism and all that stuff. Yeah. So I could have written something on this topic for many years, but it's just, I'm not throwing myself into this thing, you know what I mean? And the only reason why it happened is because it happened while I was writing this book. And I felt like I had to accurately represent the time. So I think there's the layer of it being challenging objectively, but also me personally, like not wanting to be the voice, and not wanting to throw myself into any like conversations. But it had to be done, So yeah, I think for me, it was the hardest. Like I mentioned, Ben was the hardest character for me to crack. Yeah. And this, that scene in that chapter was the hardest for me to write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mentioned before how you did such a great job of having kind of these internal conflicts to the quartet, to the 4 friends, and then that's exacerbated by everything that's happening in the community, in their world. And I'm curious, how did you kind of find the way to balance that? Like, I'm thinking about all of them, but I'm certainly thinking specifically about Shayla and her desire to get away from her group of friends and then come back to it, and how I is not so sure about that. Like, how did you make that all work? Basically, I'm just asking, how do you make it all work? What's your secret?
Yeah, well, I invented some new strategies when I was writing this book. I have, written short stories historically, and that's because writers know that this is the seat of the pants, the pantsers are the plotters, and I've been a pantser all my life. I'm like, why am I plotting? I want to discover what I'm writing about. I'll write and I'll figure it out, which you can do with short stories. But with novels, you'll be writing forever if you're just trying to like figure it out. And this novel didn't have a lot of time. It's like, we're in COVID, we're writing about COVID. We just need to, get this done. So I did outline for the first time for this book, but then also I created something called a plot chart, which was a grid. And so I had the characters' names on top of each, square, and I had them in order. And so I was able to kind of shift the story. The first draft wasn't each chapter focused on the characters. Gotcha. The second draft, we kind of started to like build it out so that each chapter was more specifically focused on the characters. And by having a chart where I could move plot around when I needed to edit, I needed to change things, it just made it possible for me to kind of follow those strains and those relationships.
Yeah. How much did your outline change, or how much did the book change from the original outline to the final book?
Well, I had to do a new outline when I included George Floyd. So after that, so that was a big change.
Yeah.
But after that, it didn't change that much. It didn't change that much. I mean, I think we were refining. And you hear me saying we, the partnership that you have with your, editors.
Yes.
We do all the work, but it still feels like a partnership. Somebody goes, what about green? And then all of a sudden you're like, we did this together, But yeah, I think it was all about sort of refining to get the story right. And I think the ending I had to rewrite a few times. The ending was hard for me to figure out, not hard, like challenging, but I just couldn't put my finger on like how to exactly bring it down. And to the last, even after when we were in copy edits, I was changing the end, not completely, but like massaging the end.
Yeah.
But no, it didn't change that much from the original outline. This was just really a gift. I mean, this book was really a gift in terms of, coming through and announcing its identity. And I had a lot of work to do. And not saying it wasn't hard, but
sure.
It was very clearly it was communicating to me very clearly, which I appreciate.
Let's talk about the ending for a bit. I am really curious, and so I want to talk about this in a way that doesn't spoil the ending, right? Obviously, but you're writing a novel that's right in the midst of all of these things happening that we're still dealing with. We're still dealing with COVID. Black folks have had a hard life forever, and it's still hard, right? Like, and your characters, there's no nice, tidy bow that you can end with this. So how did you balance how to end this in a way that's, let's say, hopeful or uplifting? And how did you kind of wrestle with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you said Black people have had a hard life forever. Like, I mean, we have to have some kind of like superpower, or like I was watching Aretha Franklin's documentary. And I was like, her connection to the church and the music, I was like, that's our survival technology right there,
Yeah.
And so I think as a Black person, you have to have some degree of hopefulness to just stay alive,
Yeah.
And so I think that when you're grappling with big issues, you have to find a healthy place to stand in it. You can't necessarily fix the issue or make it go away. So you have to have a way to relate to it that's going to be empowering for you, and that's not going to destroy you psychologically, emotionally, and all of that. So that's where I think I ended up, with the chapter, is finding a way to have the characters sort of reflect and find a place for themselves in the questions. Yeah. And then even for there to be an additional evolution with Shayla and her conversation with her mother at the end, which, I won't say what it is, but taking it to the next level. And that actually reflects my own childhood, seeing the adults who were young and who had so much passion for changing the world. And then, the result of, the civil rights movement and activism, where it wasn't quite what they expected. And then what do you do with that? What do you do with hundreds and hundreds of years of struggle around the same issues, So I thought it might be good to empower kids to find a way to integrate tough topics, as opposed to say, there's a way to fix it. It's kind of like where do you stand in it, and use your voice, whatever your unique voice is, use it. We need it to continue these conversations.
Yeah. That's a good point. I love how the characters all have their different strengths and their different things that they do to try to make their community and then thus the world a better place. I think it's a really, really powerful thing. Was that intentional? Of course it was intentional, right? Because you're the master storyteller, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I've been writing for adults, and I tell the story like maybe 10, 15 years ago, I was in an anthology, and my story was from a young person's perspective. And an editor reached out to me and was like, do you write for young people? I was like, no, I don't, years ago. Like, I could have been here years ago, but I was just like, no, I don't write for young people, And so getting to this place, I realized that it almost doesn't matter what I'm writing. Like, my own personal passion is about finding your voice, dealing with life and, being your best self and self-esteem and all that stuff. So I feel like almost anything I write is going to kind of have that message somehow in it. And I can do that in books for adults. I can do that in books for children. And it's a revelation to me that, I don't have to feel like I need to be in a box. Earlier, you were talking about not wanting to be in a box, and as an artist, you know, you want to explore and experience everything that's out there, but likely you have something as Varian that your unique voice is here to share with the world, and is probably embedded in all of your different projects, no matter what the topic or format or genre is.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What is it? What is it for you?
I don't know. I have to think about that. Usually people tell me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're probably right."
Yeah.
But I was talking to some young people today about writing, and I was telling them how every story is different. Even if it sounds the same, it's different because you're putting yourself there. You're bringing all of you to that story,
Absolutely.
and your background and your thoughts and your hopes and what you want to say, and that's going to color the story. So it could be a romance story about two people with the same name, and it will still be different because they talk and act and think and move through the world differently, influenced a lot by you. And I right. love that you're bringing yourself to it, whether you're writing for children or adults, short form or long form. Yeah. I am curious, how was it like? How was the novel process different than short stories?
It's just longer. It goes on forever. You're like, what? I'm still going. Oh my God. I'm right now finishing a third draft of YA book. We'll get to that. Sure. But yeah, I'm on page 220 of 330 pages. I'm like, still not at 100 pages. I'm almost like, I feel like I've been crawling towards 100 pages left for like 2 weeks, you know? So it's longer. I mean, I think I needed to be older for that too, for stamina. You know, you definitely have to, whatever will is required. And that's one thing I tell people, like, I have so many friends who are so interesting with so many interesting ideas. And I have a few of them who will write a story and I'll be like, oh my God, that's amazing. For the next draft, you should blah, 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 blah. Next draft, I'm done. I wrote it. You know what I mean? And I think that's really the difference between writers and non-writers. And we're not that much more brilliant or anything than your average person. It's just that we have that stamina. Like, we will go ahead and go, all right, I wrote this 350 pages. I'm going to do another draft. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do another draft and make that one even better, you know? So like, yeah, I think for me, novels are just longer. Yeah. But I have discovered that the puzzle pieces, I love doing puzzles. That's something I did all throughout, you know, last year. I'm getting edged out by puzzles in my house. And with a novel, you do feel the puzzle pieces even more than with a story. You feel it in a story, but I think with a novel, it's much more strategic. And it's a back and forth. You know, you do the creativity part and then you hit a block and then you do some strategy and then you go back and forth. So it's not just, you know, planning. But I do think I've been able to get a little bit of enjoyment from that part. Like, I figured out if I do this over here and put this over here, this will work, you know?
Yeah. I love playing with structure. I really, really do. It's interesting. Like, you came from short stories to long form. I did long form for years before I actually did my first short story because I could never get it short enough. It would just spiral out of control. And I really had to learn, well, what is the main thing I'm really talking about? And how can I get that in a way where there's some feeling of characters on the edge of change or something different without like going to this whole big thing. And it's a struggle. Like, it's short form is just as hard as long form. It's just, I guess, shorter. So theoretically it takes less time, but maybe not.
Yeah. I think I met people like that, like you, who like, I can't write in short stories. I just write novels. And I just look at you like, how is that possible? I think that's just another thing. We just come out the way we come out. You know what I mean? I got a lot to say. I got a little bit to say, you know, and we each got to kind of push to get to the other side, you know?
Were you at all intimidated by doing a novel with 4 protagonists? You know, I'm reading the book, I'm reading Shayla's thing. I'm like, all right. And then I get to chapter 2, like, oh, switch up. We got multiple POVs here. Like, how did you land on that? And like, how did that not make you want to run and throw your computer out the window?
No, it's amazing because, like I said, the first draft, it wasn't literally the chapters per character. Yeah, it was kind of already there, but it wasn't literally that, you know? Yeah. And the editor was the one who was like, you have these 4 POVs, you know, why don't you make them different chapters, you know? Yeah. And so when I went through that process, it really I didn't need to change that much, but what it did was it gave a stronger emotional overlay to the story, because with the same plot, we're now narrowing in on each person's unique sort of thing they're struggling with. Yeah. And it just made it more of an adventure for me. You know, it made it more interesting and more I don't know, it gave me a little bit more to work with.
Sure.
But like I said, they came to me, like, it's not my fault. They were just like, hey, what's up? We're here, let's do this. And I was like, okay, so yeah, it was a natural relationship betwing me and them.
But even that, you're saying it was natural and it all flowed, and that's great. But think about this, like from a structure point of view, or from a craft point of view. You have two characters in a conversation. They're both point of view characters. Right. Either one of those characters could be the one telling that story at that time. But you strategically choose which one to highlight and to get across what they're thinking, while also advancing the story and what the other one is thinking in a way that doesn't necessarily jump heads or do whatever. There's still a lot of skill involved in that. Yeah,
I'm not saying that there's no skill. I've been writing for like 30 years, so I should be able to do something by now. I mean, it's hard to identify. I think that's one of the things, like, I've had to say, what would you advise to people who are trying to write? I'm like, keep writing. You know what I mean? Because what'll happen is that your skills level up, and then you can play even easier, because you've experimented. When I was initially writing short stories, I was like going crazy with like structure and voice, and like I was just like all over the place, And I think by being so experimental, it just helped me sort of build skills to like tell stories. But what I love about this is that the characters are so entrenched in their relationships with each other, and have such different sort of energies and vibes with each other, that we get to sort of like kind of twist. So it's like if it's one of those snow globes where you turn it around and it's a different scene. When you turn it, it's like the same story, but okay, there's something else, under the surface, and someone actually told me too that the building is like a character in the book, which I didn't really, I don't know if that's really true, because I didn't really go that deep with the building, but just that sense of them, the building, that their trajectory from like, my home and my issues to like, okay, I'm going to start helping out in the building, to going out into the world, with the social justice issues. That sort of evolution of just sort of discovering and opening and learning more. I think it's just a great thing for kids to like be like, okay, kids are like in their little box, but it's a great thing for them to say, oh, I have this box, but this is happening for my friend, and this is happening for the neighbor down the hall, Yeah.
No, I mean, certainly community is, the book is all about community, right? And the different levels, right? We got the four, then we've got their families, and then we've got the building, and then we've got the community outside the building, and then we've got the world, and all these things impacting them as it shrinks in. It's like those are those Russian dolls, those nesting dolls, right? That type thing. Yeah. Okay, we've been talking a lot. We got some questions in the ask a question thing. For those watching, please feel free to pop a question in there if you have a question for Kay. I will also remind you, down at the bottom, there's this little green thing that says When the World Turned Upside Down from Cherished Books and More. So why don't you go ahead and click that button and buy a book, and buy a book for a friend, and buy a book for a school as well too, because the world always needs more books. Let's go to questions. Let me see. Okay, we have one from librarian Jean. I know Jean. Jean lives in Austin. As authors and parents, how do you handle your child reading a book about a subject, or about a subject, or by another author you don't particularly like? So let's think about this in this way. Like, let me rephrase that. The world's kind of it's an interesting time to be an author right now, with so many entities trying to ban books. What would you tell to a parent or to a librarian who is worried about teaching When the World Turned Upside Down?
What would I tell them?
I know what I tell them, but I can't say that on live internet.
Yeah. One of the questions that I've gotten in a Q&A was about dealing with, that it could be a challenging topic to deal with kids. And what I said is that I think the challenge is ours. It's not theirs. So it's not a challenging topic for them to think about. It's challenging just, conceptually, but, I think what makes us uncomfortable is all of the sort of issues that, we really, as adults, we're living with this. Really, as adults, this is the way the world is. When you have to explain that to a child, it's heartbreaking,
Yeah.
Or if it's something that you don't believe is heartbreaking, but as you're explaining it, you're going to have to kind of at least confront something as you talk about it. So, I don't think this would help the parent or librarian, but I would say that your issues are different from your child's, and that your child needs nuance, and your child needs a variety of information to interact with the world.
Yeah.
And actually, the more things they're exposed to, the more equipped they are to respond to the world, to have empathy for the world, to decide where they stand in the world. Exactly. Exposure to all of these different topics and things really just helps the kid develop their identity. It doesn't, force a child to think one way or another, but it helps them make connections in their own lives, make sense of what's going on in the world around them, which they're already trying to do, and gives them a sort of departure point for relating to the world.
Yeah. Dr. Radine Sims Bishop, there's often this quote attributed to her talking about mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And like When the World Turned Upside Down is a great book that can serve on all those cases, because we have these 4 characters who are going through all these different things, both in their small family unit and then the bigger world in general, how it's affecting them. So we have characters that could be mirror characters for us or for a young reader, where they can see themselves, or window characters where they can look out and see another world, another situation, and understand it differently, and those sliding glass doors that invite us in to step into that other world in a safe way, and to be able to discuss it in a safe, meaningful way. Because like you said, they're living with this stuff. I get really frustrated when folks are like, well, this is too hard for kids. I'm like, they are literally living through it right now. This is Absolutely. Not history. They are right in it. I promise you that they are experiencing, or they know someone who is experiencing some of these things.
Yeah.
Let's give them the opportunity to understand that and lean into that empathy and understanding.
Yeah. And you actually feel like you have more control over monitoring your child than you actually do. Yeah. They're out in the world, they're going to school, they're interacting with whoever's in their class, whatever adults are in that school.
Yeah.
So you're not actually sheltering your child,
Yeah.
You just feel like you are. Maybe it makes you feel better, just like the conversation makes us feel bad, so we say it's hard, makes you feel better to ban that book, but your kid's exposed to a lot of things, and it's actually more powerful to be able to engage in conversation with your kid about tough topics. Exactly. So, there's different lenses of like looking at reading and how you deal with it with your child, but one empowering way to do it is to talk about whatever that scene is or whatever that chapter is. And well, what do you think about that? Well, when I was a kid, this or that, and being able to use it as a tool to connect, and to communicate and to spark critical thought,
Yeah.
Especially, you can kind of, dig in and get your kid's opinion,
Exactly. A book, I love books. A book could do a lot of different things. And if someone reads a book and they're just entertained, that's great. Or if they learn something about themselves or the world, that's great too. I love books that do both. I'm not a stickler for books that just bear down a moralistic kind of theme personally, but I love books that have nuance and talk about things and leave room for the young reader to question and ask and talk about things, but also laugh and also, enjoy other stuff as well too. And I think this book does that so well.
Right. Yeah. That was also important to me, that they have adventures, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That what do kids do when adults' backs are turned? You know what I mean? Like they should just be kids sometimes too.
Yeah. We got a couple of questions from Erin and Trada Kelly, Newbery medalist Erin and Trada Kelly. I will just throw it out. Erin's got a new book, the second book in the Marisol Rainey series. Oh, wait, she's got 2 books coming out, too. She's got the one about, Erin, tell me the name of it. Fall Creek, if I'm missing the name of it. You just got to start a review. I love Erin. Anyway, again, on topic. Okay.
Those kids
from Fall Creek. Thank you so much, Erin. Erin's got one question. You mentioned how today's world is much different than what previous generations hoped for, still fighting the same struggles and issues. When you think of the future, what do you see?
It's such a hard question, honestly. But I do think that we are living in multiple worlds at once, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, the baseline for me as an individual is very different from the baseline for my parents and my grandparents in terms of, you know, my freedoms, the types of engagement that I'm going to have on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But then when you look at sort of societally, you know, the statistics, the ways that racism and discrimination have mutated to just become more embedded in the fabric of institutions and sort of life, you know, it feels a little tough. I do think that the world's evolving, and I do think that over the past maybe 5-6 years, we've publicly been able to have conversations that we've not been able to have as, you know, larger and larger groups of people across various backgrounds. For me, there's no new information necessarily, but the fact that I could go to work and have certain conversations, it was not something that I would have ever done in the past. And I don't desire to do, but then there's a listening and there's an opening that didn't exist, you know, even 5-6 years ago. So evolution is happening. What that will evolve into, I have no clue. And I guess if you look at it as a plot, you know, humans are real special, you know, so we'll see where we're going. But, you know, I definitely want to continue being part of the conversation. And my tendency is to work on, you know, the best thing to do holistic and healthily, first for the individual, then for the, you know, community around them, and pushing out from there. Like, I know that I can't fix racism, you know, what can I do within this sphere? How can I represent? How can I support people at my job? You know, all of those things in a place where I am. How can I be a light to help evolve, you know, our situation?
Yeah. You know, I many years ago, I was talking to the late, great Julius Lester, and we were talking, it was right when Obama was elected. And we were like being honest, like, we never thought, he certainly never thought it would happen in his lifetime. And I never thought it would happen in my lifetime either. But then I have 2 kids who are born when he's president. So they come into the world and that's what they see. And I love that, like you said, we have the ability to see so far based on how we grew up and what we want. And we hope for the best, but maybe we're limited by that. Maybe we're jaded by it. But I love that if we're pushing forward with those dreams and hopes, the next generation can latch onto that and then kind of push even farther and like go farther. It's part of our job as being writers too. Like, I think again, your ending really sets up the potential for change. And the idea that young people can start making a difference and they can continue making a difference as they get older.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when you think about stories as writers, if you say, okay, I'm writing this story, you sit down and write it, so much evolves in the process, you know, of writing it. And you end up drawing from more than just like your rigid conscious mind, you know? So like what you were describing about the kids taking it further, there are things that we're not even going to like know about or perceive that maybe doesn't even exist right now. That'll be part of the conversation, you know, as time goes on. So yeah, we definitely have to just be sharing the most positive, you know, supportive light that we can so that the kids can continue, to evolve.
Erin's got one other question. What is your favorite scene in the book?
Oh, that's a hard question. 2 scenes are coming to mind right now. And one of them is when, then the scenes just lead to scenes. But when Ben and Shayla are helping I cook, and they have the food fight, is a great scene. But the minute I said that, then I remembered them going into the house together, into the apartment, trying to save Daisy. And I really like that sort of like on the edge kind of creepiness of that scene. But I also really like the scene where Shayla and I are finally having the conversation about their issues, and the protest is happening down the street. They have the dogs, and they're really sort of reaching towards evolution for themselves, you know, for good reason, while the evolution is trying to happen around them. That was also one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah. That kitchen scene is a great scene. And it's a great example of how a scene can be heavy. Heavy's not the right word. It can be conflict in the scene, but there can be fun in there too. Like I remember that I think Shayla has to strip and she's measuring out what 6 feet is, which like broke my heart.
Yeah.
And then they're throwing fruit at each other, which is really great, right?
Right.
I love that you handled that so well and brought thought, but also joy to the scenes and to the story. We're going to pause and say, okay, y'all, if you haven't bought the book yet, now's a great time to do it. Click that button, go in there, buy that book, buy a couple of other books too. Books make great gifts, even though it's past the holidays. Stock up for Valentine's Day. What says love like a new book, right? Buy some books. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on next?
Yes, I'm writing a YA book. I've been writing speculative fiction for adults. So now this is going to be a speculative fiction for young people about a girl with powers. She doesn't really know where the powers come from. She's been in hiding with her grandmother, and her grandmother gets sick. And so she's thrust out into the world, and she has to learn about being a regular teenager, but also learn about where her powers come from, how they're connected to these other mysterious forces, and what she's going to do when a danger comes for her. So yeah, excited about it. It's going to be a 2-book. Do they call that a duology? It's going to be a 2-book series. And so, yeah, I'm supposed to turn it in real soon.
You know what? I feel like deadlines are just suggestions.
Just suggestions. Just think about it.
Okay, this is for YA. Do you find it any different writing for younger audiences versus YA?
Yeah, for sure. I think scope is different. Sure. I probably shouldn't say this, but
say it.
I put a little bit less pressure on myself for the middle grade. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, the kids will get it. Like, I trust them more. You know what I mean? They don't need me to do these cartwheels. They just need me to express clearly. And honestly, I probably should just take that with me through the rest of my, whatever. But I do feel like the themes, they're not heavier, but they're dealt with in a more complex way, in YA. This, and in this case, the book is not an epic, but it's kind of epic light, so the scope of it is so much bigger. So maybe it's not middle grade YA. Maybe it's just like, this was so limited, the world of when the world turns upside down was so limited to the apartment and the area, whereas this could go anywhere, Exactly. So it's been a lot sort of kind of, figuring out all of the movements of the character and the larger story and what does it mean and all that. It's been more like writing for adults.
Sure. Yeah. And that's a good point. It's not that it's easier. It's just different in how you tackle how to write something that's really honed in and very specific on the thing versus how do you write something that's more expansive. Well, it's not better or worse or easy or hard, but they take slightly different skill sets.
Right. And then the more expansive, you got to, have more control over sort of the plot and the connections. And
it gets away from you quick if you're not careful, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Have you read anything recently that you really like?
My brain is not the best for remembering facts, but in honor of Bell Hooks, who passed away, I just read All About Love, which is not for young people, but it was a great sort of reflection on love. One of the books that I did read to prepare for this, for When the World Turned Upside Down, is Not My Idea. And it's a book about whiteness by Anastasia Higginbotham. And I really love the way she talked about this question of sheltering your kids. So she's basically showing a kid who's looking at the world. She's experiencing all this and her parents are like, you're fine. And so maybe as a young white child, she's safe in a certain way, but she's connecting to humanity in ways in which humanity is not safe, So the ability to do that in like a child, size book is amazing. I was just telling you before we talked that I have been reading a lot of picture books. They are able to do so much in just such a short span of time, and I'm in awe. I've started the process of writing a picture book, and the first draft went how it went. So we're going to keep working on it and learn how to do that, But I wish that I was better. Oh, I read your book.
Thank you.
Playing the hand you're dealt. There's a
Yep.
lot of spades in there for anybody who grew up playing spades. And you take a really serious look at, you know, family legacies and secrets and safety, you know.
You.
And I think there's another layer in there too, where similar to I and Shayla, where they're struggling over the fact that they have an authentic friendship, and Shayla's seeking these friendships that are not so authentic. Your main character has this friendship that he really believes in, and it takes a new person coming in to kind of make him look at it with a new lens. And I think that's so important, because young people do end up taking shorts, you know, having these relationships that aren't great. You know, there's a lot of abusiveness between young people, and they feel like, well, I knew this person so long, or I have so much fun with that person. There's all these reasons, but the ability to really step back, you know, and see how they're being treated and see what they value is amazing. And I thought you did that really well in the story, where, you know, I think as a reader, you don't even know, you don't realize how bad not bad, but how mistreated.
Sure.
You kind of get it through his lens, where at first you just think, oh, he's just a little rough and tumble. And as the book goes on, you start to realize, wow, this guy's really, you know, not treating him so well, you know? So
well, you know, I think it's really interesting when you I mean, we have friendships and we sometimes want to hold on to them, or we want to run away from them, and we don't know how bad they can or can't be until we have some distance from it a little bit, and we're questioning, well, why did I even want to do that? Like, I feel like Shayla is very much like that, you know. Why did I want this thing? But then also there's damage done when you know, with existing friendships sometimes as well.
Right. I think also when a dynamic changes too, like when something different happens, then you're like, oh, wait a minute, you know, this is different.
I am behind on all of my reading, but I did read a book that's coming out later this year called Frizzy by Claribel Ortega, which is a graphic novel about a girl dealing with frizzy hair, and talks some about the idea of good hair and not good hair in the Latinx community. I thought it was a wonderful graphic novel. It'll be out sometime this year. But also, I've been reading lots of picture books. And, you know, Black History Month's coming up in February. Not that that's the only time to buy books by Black creators, but you know what? Buy them January, buy them in February. I'm going to highlight 3 books that I love really quickly that are just by my desk. One is Unspeakable by Carol Boston Weatherford and Floyd Cooper. Won both the Coretta Scott King Honor and Illustrator Award, among other accolades, including a Newbery Honor for Floyd, who passed away. Which is one of my favorite picture books of last year, Unspeakable.
And I'm actually going to be speaking with Brandy Colbert, who did a book called Blackbirds in the Sky, which is also the Tulsa race massacre, which is nonfiction. And she goes in with the layers of history and really gives a lot of context for, you know, the time period as well as the massacre itself.
This is a great year for nonfiction. This year, I think Brandy's book has been great. I haven't read it yet. Keckler Magoon had a book about the Black Panther Party, which was very much lauded. It's a good time to buy books. 2 more. I'm gonna mention just really quickly. Illustrator Oge Mora. I love her work. I love Everybody in the Red Brick Building by Ann Winter and Oge Mora. It's my new favorite bedtime book. And it reminds you some of When the World Turns Upside Down, because everyone's in this building and all this stuff is happening in the building. Good companion book, just saying. And thank you, Amu, which happens kind of in the building as well, too, in the community, and they all come to the building. All right, buy books, guys. Before we end, Kay, is there any other thoughts, anything else you want to say or share with the audience?
No, it's been great talking with you and thinking about the book, and thank you for saying so many things about the skill and the structure, because, you know, I'm just like, I just wrote a book, you know.
So okay, I'm gonna name drop. I was talking to Jason Reynolds about this, and he was like, hey, you know what, I love that people talk about my book and they love that I write about these issues that are important, but like it still takes skill to talk about these issues, and Black creators have to bring all these skills to a book to balance writing a book that touches on social justice while also crafting it in a way that maximizes the impact. I mean, you 4 point of view characters, weaving that through, each with their own with their own storyline, and then in some of them, those storylines very much being in conflict. Shayla and Shayla and I for sure. Like that takes skill, and I just don't want to. I don't want to, knock you on the skill stuff. I want to talk about that too because it's important.
Yeah, I think being a mom when my daughter was young. Well, when my daughter was born, and she was a baby. Like I got to see like all the work that babies do to evolve. And so when I would go out with my friends, every time a baby would cross my path, I'd be like, oh, hi, you're a rock star. And my friends would be like, do we have to stop and talk to every baby? I'm like, you don't understand what they're doing. They're doing a lot of work. Okay. Yeah. And I feel like as I feel like that about kids, they're just so different and they're dealing with deep emotions and deep, issues, deep questions. And then they all have this sort of unique spark that they may or may not recognize, And so the opportunity to kind of reflect for different, kids, it just feels nice to be able to like acknowledge and kind of like lift up all the different types of ways of being in the world. Not all of them, obviously, but 4 different types of ways of being in the world.
Yeah. Detricia, you can come back in if you have any other last minute comments for everybody.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you so much. Varian, you are a natural bookseller and a really great conversation partner. And Kay, incredible. We are so excited to put this book into children's hands. And fun fact, if people don't know or didn't remember, Kay came and celebrated her adult book at Karis in 2013.
Physically.
We love
physically
it.
There.
Physically. And so we really do appreciate you for choosing us because that is what keeps us open as a feminist bookstore. And I really hope that you'll come back for your young adult speculative fiction.
Absolutely.
The duology. Yes. We're so incredibly grateful and so happy for this event. This was a wonderful conversation. It'll be available for replay as soon as the event ends, and it'll be archived on our YouTube channel. Please, please, please buy the book. Also, request the book at your library. Stock it in your schools. Get it everywhere. Get it in front of the children. Everyone have a wonderful night.
Thanks again. Thanks, Varian.
Oh, my pleasure. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.